Hello, I'm Ryan, and welcome to my channel, The True Connoisseur, where I discuss perfume as personal experience, as cultural object. And today we are talking about spring fragrances. What is a spring fragrance? Does a spring fragrance exist? I'm not sure. We're here in my corner of the world. We're the in the middle of springtime. Easter is in the rearview mirror. Things are starting to blossom around me. Allergies are starting to creep up. And now, you know, I wear perfume with some seasonality. I kind of break the rules a lot, but I do think of perfume as having seasons. And part of that is my experience having lived in areas that have very defined seasons throughout the year. Many people in the world do not have such volatile differences between seasons. I have generally lived in places that have very strongly delineated seasons with very different climate conditions in each of them. And I've also lived all over in my life, and that has given me a weird hodgepodge of mental associations with the seasons too, because not every area is the same. But you always see folks talking about spring fragrances, and broadly speaking to me, both spring and fall are these liminal spaces in the year where it's very transitional. It's very easy to say, okay, this is a clear winter fragrance and this is a summer fragrance, because the stereotypes for both those seasons is one is aggressively hot, and that has a certain level of restriction on what you can wear, and the other is aggressively cold, which does mean certain fragrances tend not to perform well in that sort of climate, and others, that are a little bit sturdier won't be as overwhelming in the midst of, a particularly dry, chilly season. But spring and fall are liminal spaces, really. They're the places where, as perfume enthusiasts, we get to have the most fun, because in many ways, anything goes. If you live in an area of the world where you have pretty strongly opposed summer and winter, that means when you're in spring or fall, the temperatures tend to go up and down. So you can kind of jump around between more dark, heavy, gourmandy fragrances and also lighter fragrances depending on the temperature. So what is the difference really if you're going to be a seasonal wearer of fragrance between spring and fall? And it really has to do with texture, I think. In fall, you start to really think of harvest time and dry textures. The world is drying up at that point. It's preparing for winter. Nature is going into its kind of hibernation period. And that comes with a certain texture of dryness in the air. If you've ever lived somewhere that has a lot of foliage, there's a unique scent that comes about in fall, the scent of dry leaves on the ground. It changes the way the woods smell, the way the air smells at night. Similarly, spring has its own distinct set of aromas, and it has to do with a lot of greenness and freshness entering the world, flowers blossoming for the first time. For those of us with seasonal allergies like myself, that's not always the most joyful occasion, but it is gorgeous to have the aromas of flowers, to see sun hitting beautiful blossoms during this time of year for the first time. It's also a time of year where there tends to be a heavy amount of rain. At least, in my corner of the world, the famous cliche, April showers bring May flowers, right? So it is this kind of, it can also be a kind of contemplative, cool time too. Rainy days have their own sort of distinct character in spring versus a rainy day in the fall. Because it's kind of like a green rain, so the wetness feels a little bit different than like just kind of like a rain that happens in kind of the barren scape of a late autumn. So I've collected some things that I have been wearing and will be wearing this spring that embody different facets of spring fragrances, and maybe some interesting conversation will come out as I look for these. This is not any sort of top 10 list or canon of spring fragrances for me. These are just things that I'm wearing. Some of these are just very new to me, and I'm enjoying wearing them and discovering them because they're appropriate in this time of year. But I think all of these have facets that reflect springtime seasonal wear for me. I could wear some of these at other points in the year, but it is really the case that I think these are uniquely well suited to the cliches of spring. So first and foremost, this is a relatively new fragrance in my collection. I haven't made a big impact on this at all. It's a actually very sizable bottle too, so it'll take me a while to make a dent on this, but I do really quite love it. And this is Aqua di Parma Note di Colonia 4. Note di Colonia. This is from their kind of Aqua di Parma's exclusive series of sorts. It's a series of fragrances that are just built around, as you can say, the notes of Aqua di Colonia. Every one of them has their own sort of like ad copy. I found those very disconnected from the nature of the fragrance, but what you can really see them as being is essays on different facets of Aqua di Parma's Colonia. Some of them are a little bit more interesting than others. I thought all of them were nice enough on sniff, but 4 was the only one to make an impression on me. And 4 is really nice because it's a particularly resinous spin on this DNA. So you get the gorgeous, bright, crisp citrus of Colonia, a little bit more delicate in Colonia. This is obviously their exclusive series, but this is actually, they do a pretty good job of expressing a level of refinement here. But this is a much more resinous fragrance. And I'm going to talk about another fragrance after this that I feel like has a little bit of kinship with this. This is primarily a Popinax so it's kind of like a honeyed floral version of Colonia with like this wonderful resinous Popinax presence. I think it's absolutely beautiful. It is it's one of those good taste perfumes, right? But it is kind of a warm, tasteful, luxurious hotel, I think is the way Père Soleil has described it in his review about it, and I kind of haven't been able to shake that, though it feels a little bit more outdoorsy to me than that, a little bit more warm, a little bit more sunlight on flowers. It actually reminds me a bit, there's not like a one-to-one note correlation at all, but in terms of feel, in terms of wear, even in terms of smell, it's like a Cartier L'Envol cousin, because you get that sort of honeyed sweetness in it with the floral elements. Absolutely beautiful. I think what this is capturing for me here is really that sort of bright sun on the flowers sort of aroma. I don't really have anything else here that is particularly evocative of that effect in the same way. And this really feels like spring to me. It's going to be a little bit too rich to wear in summer. That resinous dry down is a little bit heavy. And so it's perfect for this season. And I think it's really nicely done. The next one is Santa Maria Novella Apopanax, which is a favorite of Pep, who you might know from the channel The Sentinel. He's the reason I really sought this out to sample it when I had the opportunity, and it is absolutely lovely. It is a sort of bright lemon, sort of lemon sherbet, but not really that vanillic, like not in that sweet way, but it's kind of like a bright, joyful, sweet, cheerful lemon with this wonderful glowing Apoponax. These two are cousins in a way. This is a little bit more, I don't know, warm and powdery and effusive. I wore this on Easter, and it was a perfect scent for that occasion. It just captures the sort of wonderful warmth of spring. I think one facet of spring is just this anticipation of the sunlight and the temperatures rising in a way that they haven't. There's, you know, the monotony of winter is over. So a spring fragrance, to me, often starts to evoke that things are starting to turn a corner. It's not, these are not like hot fragrances, but there's a sense of like sunny warmth about them, a sense of joy. And that carries through too for this other fragrance, which I've been spending time with for the first time. This is Geron Jiki, the Eau de Parfum, the recently revitalized, revamped Jiki. It's in wonderful shape. If you like it, it's kind of like until I really got to know it, I never really appreciated just how much Jiki shares in common with Shalimar, which is one of my favorite Guerlains. Jiki obviously was, according to the apocryphal story, or possibly true story, that Shalimar's created when there was an overdose of ethyl vanillin in a batch of Jiki, and you can really feel that kinship here. But there is this sort of like bright lemon sherbet, because there is that sort of vanilla element here with the lemon, and then you get the lavender here as opposed to the strong kind of like iris element in Shalimar. And so it's lavender. This is an early fougere, and then you get this sort of like lightly warm animalic tones in it. Some people describe it as halitosis. I don't think that's right at all. There's definitely something a little bit, you know, a little bit animalic there, but it's lovely, gentle, really classic Guerlain stuff, and it's kind of like the I don't know. Shalimar in certain concentrations can already feel very spring-like, but this feels even more so with that cheery lemon. This is a much cheerier, more approachable fragrance than Shalimar in a lot of ways, because Shalimar is just so rich and opulent. This is greener, it's fresher. And speaking of fougères, we might as well jump over to another fougère, which is still my favorite fougère. I talk about this all the time, and I haven't found anything to replace it, to be honest with you, which is the revamp of Fuer Royale, which was done by Rodrigo Flores Leather Oud under the creative direction of Rocha Dove, actually. I just think this is the best of the modern fougères. Obviously a throwback to the original Fuer Royale, but Fuer Royale has had a number of versions over the years. This is not, according to Rodrigo Flores Leather Oud, any attempt to just recreate the original, but also an attempt for him to really express himself and create something new. And there's just such a wonderful blend of spices in this. A really smooth but subtle lavender. It's not a sharp, spiky lavender like you would get in Geron Jiki. And just a really gorgeously well-rounded, you know, coumarin in the base. It is really nice. And I just haven't found anything better than that. It's the apex of the fougère for me. I've flirted with other fougères. I keep trying to fall in love with new ones, and eventually I just realized this is the one for me. I don't need another. And it's perfect for springtime. Fougères, because of that lavender, because of the greenness, are often really good for springtime. Some fougères will skew a little bit more opulent depending on the style. I am partial to ones like Fuer Royale that skew a little bit more green and spicy, and clean in this case. It's a very clean fougere. Similarly, in that same category, but a little bit different, Hermes Equipage Geranium. Equipage Geranium, you know, I go back and forth on wearing this and whether it's a spring or fall scent. It kind of does equally well, because there's the dry spiciness of Equipage Geranium, that sort of geranium note here that works just beautifully in fall. But there's a green, bright soapiness about this too, that works very well in this season, and it kind of carries on from the situations in which I would wear Fuer Royale. I don't wear this as much, but I actually had a bottle. I swapped it off, and then somebody swapped another bottle with me, and I took it. I got it back, and I'm really happy I do, because I think it's such a perfect scent, a perfect blend of old and new, with such an intriguingly transparent structure for something that is so spicy and dense. But I think what's interesting as I look at all of these scents so far, including Fuer Royale, which some people think is a formal scent, but I find these all fairly cheery. There are more serious fougères than Fuer Royale. It is kind of, it's definitely formal, but it is not. It's not serious, if that's a fair distinction. And Equipage Geranium just feels absolutely approachable, despite being so impeccably put together. This has become my style of, like, to the extent that I still wear, you know, like, old school fragrances. There was a point in time where I was in this hobby and I was aggressively pursuing this ideal of kind of old world maturity and elegance, and that was when I was collecting my most vintage bottles and things like that. And this, to me, is one of the ones that kind of has survived as I've kind of like shifted away from that ethos, but because it just feels comfortable in a way that so much of that stuff doesn't. There's nothing stuffy about Equipage Geranium, and that is an utmost compliment for it. But speaking of formality, I do think this fragrance is actually a little bit more serious, but it still feels appropriate for spring because of the clean floral nature of it. And this is my favorite, I mean, I guess really is my favorite leather forward perfume, and that is Flores Leather Oud. Flores Leather Oud doesn't seem to get the attention that I think it deserves. It is not to be confused with the Dior of the same name. The leather in this is just so beautifully done with such a wonderful, clean, spicy floral heart. It's a very clean saddle leather. Very elegant, formal, and then the oud in the base is gently medicinal, but like rounded. It just blends. The oud and leather tend to go very well together, and this sort of like gentlemanly saddle leather works well for this. It reminds me of just sitting in a leather armchair being surrounded by fresh flowers. That's really what I get out of Leather Oud. It is that sort of comforting place. As I discussed in my top 10 favorite scents video, I really love scents that help create a comforting aura. They kind of center me a bit, and as much as you would think like a really robust leather is not that, it is that in the case of Leather Oud. And speaking of scents that comfort me, none fit that characterization better than ZofCoob, which I wear this all year round. I think it works well in winter. I think it works well in fall. It's a little bit much for summer, but even then in the morning, sometime I'll wear this. It is an orange blossom with a sharp bitter orange opening and a really unique woody base. There's nothing else I've ever tried that is like ZofCoob, and that is the reason I have it. And I don't know that I'll replace it when it's gone, but I'll definitely miss it because there's just nothing. There's nothing out there like it. It's persistently warm, becomes gently powdery. It's comforting. It's bright. It's refreshing. It's not sweet, really, which is also really lovely for something that has orange blossom. Orange blossom tends to skew sweet. So I find this has the brightness and warmth that you would want in a spring morning. It's kind of like, it is perfect to get up and just kind of spray on and have your breakfast. It's that sort of like warm, comforting experience. Something a little less warm, I find this almost a little bit more subdued, is Lalique Hommage à l'Homme, which is a really intriguing take on violet. And violet is a peculiar note unto itself. This fragrance is now discontinued, but it was always kind of like, it was one of those things where it was discontinued because it wasn't selling. You could get this for a song at one period in time. But like the Lalique masculines of this era, it's like kind of impeccably made. It really has like this sort of unusually dewy violet effect with a kind of woody base. It really feels like it's capturing that sort of rainy, damp facet of spring for me, in the same way that you might get that from something like Annick Goutal's Un Matin d'Orage, which really gets that sort of like just after the rain feeling. But this is a little bit more, almost slightly humid feeling to it, with a sort of like juicy fruitiness to the violet impression here. It's really unusual. It's really nice. I kind of hold on to it partially for nostalgic reasons. It was a fragrance that I connected with many years ago, and just I kind of missed it when I didn't have it in my collection, so I brought it back. I don't want to let it go, but it is so perfectly springtime. It really has been fitting the bill here. And next we're going to talk about two sort of springtime, woody, spicy incense fragrances. One of these is Oud Shat by the Different Company. This is a Bertrand Duchefort creation, kind of in the same wheelhouse as Timbuktu, Jubilation, L'Artisan Al Oud, those sorts of creations. It is just very resinous and round in like a dry green sort of way. I almost get like a sort of like bamboo wood feeling from this, with a little bit of nutty roundness and smoke. This is really from the era where I think Bertrand Duchefort was doing some of his most impressive work structurally. These sort of stained glass windows of really compositionally dense structures with rich elements that still somehow just kind of almost diffuse out, like a stained glass window diffusing light with all these different facets. The creamy, woody nuttiness of this is something else, because it's really like fresh and bright at the same time. I find the name a little bit almost misleading. Oud Shat is not perhaps the most appropriate name for something that I feel is so really, creamy and bright and pleasant. I've really enjoyed this. This I picked up because of Bertrand Duchefort, and it really doesn't disappoint. It's kind of the fourth cousin of that quartet of Timbuktu, Jubilation Man, L'Artisan Oud, and it really is, if this is the closing chapter of that unofficial quartet, it's a really satisfying one. I think people overlook this one because it just didn't ever really get the love that the others did, but it's beautiful. And finally, in the realm of what we might call like a springtime incense, I've been enjoying Aquaflor Bakur, which was created by Seleno Colonia for the brand. It is an ode to Omani frankincense, and it is this gorgeously earthy, metallic frankincense over this earthy base, woody, spicy. There's a little bit of cinnamon here helping bring out the metallic qualities in the frankincense, but it's that contrast between this sort of like sharp, piquant frankincense and this earthy base that makes it perfect for spring. It's actually kind of like a lovely thing to wear when you're walking around outside because of this sort of like treble bass effect in the fragrance. It just carries nicely out in the air and kind of combines nicely with the aroma of flowers and plants. It's, even though it's not especially a green perfume. And obviously, incense has some nice place in the springtime season because of the associations with Easter, which is one of the major liturgical events in the Christian calendar, alongside, you know, Palm Sunday, Ash Wednesday, all these sorts of liturgical events. Incense has its place to play in that. This is a wonderful and not quite, you know, liturgical incense, but one that is working for me very well in this springtime. And across the spectrum, you know, you're seeing liturgical facets, you're seeing floral notes, you're seeing this interplay between green elements. I suppose one thing that is underrepresented here is like really stemmy greenness, which I don't necessarily have something that's particularly exceptional in my collection right now that is stemmy and green, but this does kind of capture the facets of springtime that I personally respond to, these sorts of bright, warm citruses, honeyed tones from resins, hints of liturgical incense, and also, you know, just a sense of, you know, sometimes a little bit of like that sort of like clean, cool floral tone that you get in some of these fragrances. That, to me, encapsulates a lot of what I pick up in spring. I don't know if, for those of you out there, I'm missing any particular facets that you feel are particularly evocative of springtime for you. Obviously, everybody's experience of spring is a little bit different, not just because of geographical differences, but also because of, you know, we just have different experiences, different cultural experiences, different religious upbringings, different things like that that might impact our sense of what springtime is for us. So let me know in the comments. Let me know what you have been wearing this spring that's been a source of joy for you. Let me know if you've tried any of these fragrances too and have thoughts on any of them. And I will happily catch you all in the next one.